The Rise of Kyoshi by F.C. Yi with Michael Dante DiMartino. The test. Yokoya Port was a town easy to overlook. Situated on the edge of Whaletail Strait, it could have been a major restocking point for ships leaving from one of the many harbours that supplied Amashu. But the strong, reliable, prevailing winds made it too easy and cost-effective for southbound merchants to cruise right past it and reach Simsham Big Island in a straight shot. Janshu wondered if locals knew or cared that ships laden with riches sailed tantalizingly close by, while they were stuck elbows deep in the cavity of another elephant koi. Only a quirk of fate and weather kept piles of gold, spices, precious books, and scrolls from landing on their doorstep. Instead, their lot was fish guts, a wealth of moors and gills. The landward side was even less promising. The soil of the peninsula grew thin and rocky as it extended further into the sea. It had disturbed Janshu to see crop fields so meagre and balding as he drove through the countryside into town for the first time. The farmland lacked the wild, volcanic abundance of the Makapu Valley, or the carefully ordered productivity of Ba Sing Se's outer ring, where growth bent to the exacting will of the king's planners. Here, a farmer would have to be grateful for whatever sustenance they could pull from the dirt. The settlement lay at the intersection of three different nations: earth, air, and water, and yet none had ever laid much of a claim to it. The conflicts of the outside world had little impact on the daily life of the Yokoyans. To them, the ravages of the Yellowneck and uprising in the deep interior of the Earth Kingdom were a less interesting story than the wayward flying bison that had gone loose from the air temple and knocked the thatching off a few roofs last week. Despite being seagoers, they probably couldn't name any of the dreaded pirate leaders carving up the eastern waters in the open defiance of the Ba Sing Se Navy. All in all, Yokoya Port might as well have not been on the map, which meant, for Jiangshu and Kelsang's desperate sacrilegious little experiment, it was perfect. Jiangshu trudged uphill in the wet, mucky snowfall, his neck prickling from the bundled straw cloak around his shoulders. He passed the wooden pillar that marked the spiritual center of this village without sparing it a glance. There was nothing on the sides or on top of it. It was just a bare log driven upright into the ground of a circular courtyard. It wasn't carved with any decorations, which seemed lazy for a town where nearly every adult had a working knowledge of carpentry. There, the post grudgingly said to any nearby spirits, "Hope you're happy." Weathered houses lined the broad, eroded avenue, poking steeply into the air like spear points. His destination was the larger two-story meeting hall at the end. Kelsang had set up shop there yesterday, saying he needed as much floor space as possible for the test. He'd also claimed that the location enjoyed some auspicious wind currents, using the very solemn and holy method of licking his finger and holding it up in the air. Whatever helped. Jiang Shu sent a quick prayer to the guardian of the divine log as he pulled off his snow boots, laid them on the porch, and ducked through the door curtains. The interior of the hall was surprisingly large, with far corners draped in shadow and thick planked walls cut from what must have been truly massive trees. The air smelled of resin. 10 very long, very faded yellow cloths stretched across the worn floorboards. A row of toys lay on each one, evenly spaced like a seed bed. A bison whistle, a wicker ball, a misshapen blob that might have been a stuffed turtle duck, a coiled whalebone spring, one of those flappy drums that made noise as you spun it back and forth between your palms. The toys looked as worn and beaten as the outside of this building. Kelsang knelt at the far end of the cloths. The Airbender monk was busy placing more knickknacks with a carefulness and precision that rivaled an acupuncturist setting their needles. As if it mattered whether the miniature boat sailed east or west. He stayed on his hands and knees, shuffling his great bulk sideways, his billowing orange robes and wiry black beard hanging so low they made another sweep over the floor that had already been scrubbed clean. "I didn't know there were so many toys," Jiang Shu said to his old friend. He spotted a large white marble that looked too close to the edge of the fabric and, with a graceful extension of his wrist, levitated it while earthbending in front of Kelsang. It hovered like a fly, waiting for his attention. Kelsang didn't look up as he plucked the marble out of the air and put it back where it had started. There's thousands. I'd ask you to help, but you wouldn't do it right. Jiang Shu's head hurt at the statement. At this point, they were well past doing it right. How did you change Abbot Dorji's mind about giving you the relics? He asked. The same way you convinced Liu Beifong to let us administer the air nomad test in the Earth cycle, Kelsang said calmly as he recentered a wooden top. I didn't. Like a certain friend of theirs from the Water Tribe always said, it was better to ask for forgiveness than wait for permission. And as far as Jiang Shu was concerned, the time for waiting had long since passed. When Avatar Kuruk, the keeper of balance and peace in the world, the bridge between spirits and humans, passed away at the ripe old age of 33. 33, the only time Kuruk had ever been early for anything. It became the duty of his friends, his teachers, and other prominent benders to find the new Avatar, reincarnated into the next nation of the elemental cycle. Earth, fire, air, water, and then earth again. An order as unchanging as the seasons. A process stretching back nearly 1,000 generations before Kuruk, and one that would hopefully continue for 1,000 more. Except this time, it wasn't working. It had been 7 years since Kuruk's death. 7 years of fruitless searching. Jiang Shu had pored over every available record from the Four Nations, going back hundreds of years, and the hunt for the Avatar had never faltered like this in documented history. No one knew why, though revered elders traded guesses behind closed doors. The world was impure and had been abandoned by the spirits. The Earth Kingdom lacked cohesion, or maybe it was the water tribes and the poles that needed to unify. The Airbenders had to come down from their mountains and get their hands dirty instead of preaching. The debate went on and on. Jiang Shu cared less about apportioning blame and more about the fact that he and Kelsang had let down their friend again. The only serious decree of Kuruk's before he departed from the living was that his closest companions find the next Avatar and do right by them. And so far they'd failed. Spectacularly. Right now, there should have been a happy, burbling 7-year-old Earth Avatar in the care of their loving family, being watched over by a collection of the best, wisest benders of the world. A child in the midst of being prepared for the assumption of their duties at the age of 16. Instead, there was only a gaping void that grew more dangerous by the day. Jiang Shu and the other masters did their best to keep the missing Avatar a secret, but it was no use. The cruel, the power-hungry, the lawless, people who normally had the most to fear from the Avatar, were starting to feel the scales shifting in their favor. Like sand sharks responding to the slightest vibrations of pure instinct, they tested their limits, probed new grounds. Time was running out. Kelsang finished setting up when the noon gong struck. The sun was high enough to melt snow off the roof, and the dripping flow of water pattered on the ground like light rain. The silhouettes of villagers and their children queuing up for the test could be seen outside through the paper screen windows. The air was full of excited chatter. No more waiting, Jiang Shu thought. This happens now. Earth avatars are traditionally identified by directional geomancy, a series of rituals designed to winnow through the largest and most populous of the Four Nations as efficiently as possible. Each time, a special set of bone trigrams was cast and interpreted by the earthbending masters. Half the Earth Kingdom was ruled out as the location of the newborn Avatar. Then, from the remaining territory, another half, and then another half again. The possible locations kept shrinking until the searchers were brought to the doorstep of the Earth Avatar child. It was a quick way to cover ground and entirely fitting to the earthbending state of mind. A question of logistics, simple to the point of being brutal. And it normally worked on the first try. Jiang Shu had been a part of expeditions set by the bones to barren fields, empty gem caverns below Ba Sing Se, a patch of Siwong desert so dry that not even the sandbenders bothered with it. Liu Beifong had read the trigrams. King Buro of Amashu gave it a shot. Neliao of the gardener took her turn. The masters worked their way down through the earthbending hierarchy until Jiang Shu racked up his fair share of misses as well. His friendship with Kura brought him no special privilege when it came to the next Avatar. After the last attempt had placed him on an iceberg at the North Pole with only turtle seals as potential candidates, Jiang Shu became open to radical suggestions. A drunken commiseration with Kelsang spawned a promising new idea. If the ways of the Earth Kingdom weren't working, why not try another nation's method? After all, wasn't the Avatar, the only bender of all four elements, an honorary citizen of the entire world? That was why the two of them were wiping their noses with tradition and trying the air nomad way of identifying the Avatar. Yokoya would be a practice run, a safe place far from the turmoil of land and sea, where they could take notes and fix problems. If Yokoya went smoothly, they could convince their elders to expand the test further throughout the Earth Kingdom. The Air Nomad's method was simple, in theory. Out of the many toys laid out, only 4 belonged to avatars of eras gone by. Each 7-year-old child of the village would be brought in and presented with a dazzling array of playthings. The one who was drawn to the 4 special toys in a remembrance of their past lives was the Avatar Reborn. A process as elegant and harmonious as the Airbenders themselves. In theory. In practice, it was chaos. Pure and unhinged. It was a disaster the likes of which the 4 nations had never witnessed. Jiang Shu hadn't thought of what might happen after the children who failed the test were told to leave their selections behind and make room for the next candidate. The tears, the wailing, the screaming. Trying to get toys away from kids who only had moments before been promised they could have their pick. There was no force in existence stronger than the child's righteous fury at being robbed. The parents were worse. Maybe our nomad caretakers handled the rejection of their young ones with grace and humility, but families in the other nations weren't made up of monks and nuns. Especially in the Earth Kingdom, where all bets were off once it came to blood ties. Villagers whom he'd shared friendly greetings with in the days leading up to the test became snarling canyon crawlers once they'd been told that their precious little Jay, or Mirai, was not in fact the most important child in the world, as they'd secretly known all along. More than a few swore up and down that they'd seen their offspring play with invisible spirits, or bend earth and air at the same time. Kelsang would push back gently. Are you sure your child wasn't earthbending during a normal breeze? Are you sure the baby wasn't simply playing? Some couldn't take a hint, especially the village captain. As soon as they'd passed over her daughter, Ioma, or something, she'd given them a look of utter contempt and demanded to see a higher-ranking master. Sorry, lady, Jiang Shu thought after Kelsang spent nearly 10 minutes talking her down. We can't all be special. For the last time, I'm not negotiating a salary with you, Jiang Shu shouted in the face of a particularly blunt farmer. Being the Avatar is not a paid position. The stocky man shrugged. Sounds like a waste of time, then. I'll take my child and go. Out of the corner of his eye, Jiang Shu caught Kelsang frantically waving his hands, making a cut-off sign of the neck. The little girl had wandered over to the whirly flying toy that had once entertained an ancient Avatar and was staring at it intently. Huh. They weren't intending to get a genuine result today. But picking the first item correctly was already improbable. Too improbable to risk stopping now. Okay, Jiang Shu said. This would have to come out of his own pocket. 50 silvers a year if she's the Avatar. 65 silvers a year if she's the Avatar, and 10 if she's not. Why would I pay you if she's not the Avatar? Jiang Shu roared. Kelsang coughed and thumped loudly on the floor. The girl had picked up the whirligig and was eyeing the drum. 2 out of 4 correct. Out of thousands. Holy Shu. I mean, of course, Jiang Shu said quickly. Deal. They shook hands. It would be ironic, a prank worthy of Kurik's sense of humor, to have his reincarnation be found as a result of a peasant's greed. And the very last child in line for testing to boot. Jiang Shu nearly chuckled. Now the girl had the drum in her arms as well. She walked over to a stuffed hog monkey. Kelsang was beside himself with excitement, his neck threatening to burst through the wooden beads wrapped around it. Jiang Shu felt lightheaded. Hope bashed against his rib cage, begging to be let out after so many years trapped inside. The girl wound up her foot and stamped on the stuffed animal as hard as she could. Die! She screamed in her tiny little treble. She grounded under her heel, the stitches audibly ripping. The light went out of Kelsang's face. He looked like he'd witnessed a murder. 10 silvers, the farmer said. Get out, Jiang Shu snapped. Come on, Suzu, the farmer called. Let's get. After wrestling the other toys away from the butcher of hog monkeys, he scooped the girl up and walked out the door, the whole escapade nothing but a business transaction. In doing so, he nearly bowed over another child who'd been spying on the proceedings from the outside. Hey, Jiang Shu said, you forgot your other daughter. That one ain't mine, the farmer said as he thumped down the steps into the street. That one ain't anyone's. An orphan, then. Jiang Shu hadn't spotted the unchaperoned girl around town in the days before, but maybe he glossed over her, thinking she was too old to be a candidate. She was much, much taller than any of the other children who'd been brought in by their parents. As Jiang Shu walked over to examine what he'd missed, the girl quavered, threatening to flee, but a curiosity won over her fright. She remained where she was. Underfed, Jiang Shu thought with a frown as he looked over the girl's hollow cheeks and cracked lips. And definitely an orphan. He'd seen hundreds of children like her in the inner provinces where outlaw Dao Fei ran unchecked, their parents slain by whatever bandit group was ascended in the territory. She must have wandered far into the relatively peaceful area of Yokoya. Upon hearing about the avatar test, the families of the village had dressed up their eligible children in their finest garments as if it were a festival day. But this child was wearing a threadbare coat with her elbows poking through the holes in the sleeves. Her oversized feet threatened to burst the straps of her too small sandals. None of the local farmers were feeding or clothing her. Kelsang, who, despite his fearsome appearance, was always better with children, joined them and stooped down. With a smile, he transformed from an intimidating orange mountain into a giant-sized version of the stuffed toys behind him. Why, hello there, he said, putting an extra layer of friendliness into his booming rumble. What's your name? The girl took a long, guarded moment, sizing them up. Kyoshi, she whispered. Her eyebrows knotted as if revealing her name was a painful concession. Kelsan took in a tattered state and avoided the subject of her parents for now. Kyoshi, would you like a toy? Are you sure she isn't too old? Jiang Shu said. She's bigger than some of the teenagers. Hush you, Kelsang said. He made a sweeping gesture at the hall festooned with relics for Kyoshi's benefit. The unveiling of so many playthings at once had an entrancing effect on most of the children. But Kyoshi didn't gasp, or smile, or move a muscle. Instead, she maintained eye contact with Kelsang until he blinked. As quick as a whip, she scampered by him, snagging an object off the floor, and ran back to where she was standing, on the porch. She gauged Kelsang and Jiang Shu for their responses intently as they watched her. Kelsang glanced at Jiang Shu and tilted his head at the clay turtle Kyoshi clutched to her chest. One of the 4 true relics. Not a single candidate had come anywhere near it today. They should have been as excited for her as they had been for evil little Suzu. Jiang Shu's heart was clouded with doubt. It was hard to believe they'd be so lucky after that previous head fake. Good choice, Kelsang said. But I've got a surprise for you. You can have 3 more. 4 whole toys to yourself. Wouldn't you like that? Jiang Shu sensed a shift in the girl's stance, a tremor in her foundation that was obvious through the wooden floorboards. Yes, she would like 3 more toys very much. What child wouldn't? But in her mind, the promise of more was dangerous, a lie designed to hurt her. If she loosened her grip on the single prize she held right now, she would end up with nothing, punished for believing in the kindness of this stranger. Kyoshi shook her head. Her knuckles whitened around the clay turtle. It's okay, Kelsang said. You don't have to put that down. That's the whole point. You can choose different. Hey! The girl took a step back, and then another, and then, before they could react, she was sprinting down the hill with one-of-a-kind, centuries-old avatar relic in her hands. Halfway along the street, she took a sharp turn like an experienced fugitive, throwing off a pursuer, and disappeared into the space between 2 houses. Jiang Shu closed his eyelids against the sun. The light came through them in scarlet blots. He could feel his own pulse. His mind was somewhere else right now. Instead of Yokoya, he stood in the center of an unnamed village deep in the interior of the Earth Kingdom, newly liberated by Zhu An and the Yellownecks. In this waking dream, the stench of rotting flesh soaked through his clothes and the cries of survivors haunted the wind. Next to him, an official messenger who'd been carried there by a palanquin, read from a scroll, spending minute after minute listing the Earth Kingdom's honorifics, only to end by telling Jiang Shu that reinforcements from His Majesty's army would not be coming to help. He tried to shake free of the memory, but the past had set its jagged hooks into him. Now he sat at a negotiating table made of pure ice, and on the other side was Tulok, lord of the Fifth Nation pirates. The elderly corsair laughed his consumptive laugh at the notion he might honor his grandfather's promise to leave the southern coastlines of the continent in peace. His convulsions spattered blood and phlegm all over the accords drafted by Avatar Yang Chen in her own holy hand, while his daughter lieutenant watched by his side, his soulless gaze boring into Jiang Shu like he was so much prey. In these times, and in many others, he should have been at the right hand of the Avatar, the ultimate authority who could bend the world to their will. Instead, he was alone, facing down great beasts of land and sea, their jaws closing in, encasing the kingdom in darkness. Kelsang yanked him back into the present with a bruising slap on the back. "Come on," he said. "The way you look, people would think you lost your nation's most important cultural artifact." The Airbender's good humor and ability to take setbacks in stride was normally a great comfort to Jiang Shu, but right now he wanted to punch his friend in his stupid bearded face. He composed his own features. "We need to go after her," he said. Kelsang pursed his lips. It would feel bad to take the relic away from a child who was so little. She can hang on to it. I'll go back to the temple and face Dorje's wrath alone. There's no need for you to implicate yourself. Jiang Shu didn't know what counted for wrath among airbenders. That wasn't the issue here. "You'd ruin the air nomad task to make a child happy," he said incredulously. "It'll find its way back to where it belongs." Kelsang looked around and paused. Then his smile faded, as if this little blot of a town were a harsh dose of reality that was only now taking effect. "Eventually," he sighed. "Maybe." 9 years later. To Kyoshi, it was very clear. This was a hostage situation. Silence was the key to making it through to the other side. Waiting with complete and total passivity. Neutral Jing. Kyoshi walked calmly down the path through the fallow field, ignoring the cover grass that leaned over and tickled her ankles, the sweat beading on her forehead that stung her eyes. She kept quiet and pretended that 3 people who'd fallen in beside her like muggers in an alley weren't a threat. "So like I was telling the others, my mum and dad think we'll have to dredge the Peakside canals earlier this year," Aoma said, drawing out the mum and dad intentionally, dangling what Kyoshi lacked in front of her. She crooked her hands into the crowding bridge position while slamming her feet into the ground with solid whumps. One of the terraces collapsed in the last storm. Above them, floating high out of reach, was the last precious jar of pickled spicy kelp that the entire village would see this year. The one that Kyoshi had been charged with delivering to Jiang Shu's mansion. The one that Aoma had earthbent out of Kyoshi's hand and was now promising to drop at any second. The large clay vessel bobbed up and down, sloshing the brine against the wax paper seal. Kyoshi had to stifle a yelp every time the jar lurched against the limits of Aoma's control. "No noise. Wait it out. Don't give them anything to latch onto. Talking will only make it worse." "She doesn't care," Suzu said. "Precious servant girl doesn't give a lick about farming matters. She's got a cushy job in the fancy house. She's too good to get her hands dirty." "Won't step in a boat neither," Jay said. In lieu of elaborating further, he spat on the ground, nearly missing Kyoshi's heels. Aoma never needed a reason to torment Kyoshi, but as for the others, genuine resentment worked just fine. It was true that Kyoshi spent her days under the roof of a powerful sage instead of breaking her nails against field stones. She certainly never risked the choppy waters of the strait in pursuit of a catch. But what Jay and Suzu conveniently neglected was that every plot of arable land near the village was every seaworthy boat down in the dock belonged to a family. Mothers and fathers, as Aoma was so fond of saying, passed along their trade to daughters and sons in an unbroken line, which meant there was no room for an outsider to inherit any means to survive. If it hadn't been for Kelsang and Jiang Shu, Kyoshi would have starved in the streets right in front of everyone's noses. Hypocrites. Kyoshi pressed her tongue against the roof of her mouth as hard as she could. Today was not going to be the day. Someday, maybe, but not today. Lay off her, Oma said, shifting her stance into dividing bridge. I hear that being a servant girl is hard work. That's why we're helping with the deliveries. Isn't that right, Kyoshi? For emphasis, she threaded the jar through a narrow gap in the branches of an overhanging tree, a reminder of who was in control here. Kyoshi shuddered as the vessel dove toward the ground like a hawk before swooping back up to safety. Just a little further, she thought, as the path took a sharp turn around the hillside. A few more silent, wordless steps until... There. They'd arrived at last. The Avatar's estate, in all its glory. The mansion that Master Jiangsu built to house the savior of the world was designed in the image of a miniature city. A high wall ran in a perfect square around the grounds, with a division in the middle to separate the austere training grounds from the vibrant living quarters. Each section had its own imposing south-facing gatehouse that was larger than the Yokoya meeting hall. The massive iron-studded doors of the residential gate were flung open, offering a small windowed glimpse of the elaborate topiary inside. A herd of placid goat dogs grazed over the lawn, cropping the grass to an even length. Foreign elements had been carefully integrated into the design of the complex, which meant that gilded dragons chased carved polar orcas around the edges of the walls. The placement of the Earth Kingdom style roofs, tiles, cleverly matched the air nomad's numerology principles. Authentic dyes and paints had been imported from around the world, ensuring that the colors of all four nations were on full, equitable display. When Jiangsu had bought the land, he'd explained to the village elders that Yokoya was an ideal spot to settle down and educate the Avatar, a quiet, safe place far away from the outlawed ravage lands deeper in the Earth Kingdom, and close enough to both the Southern Air Temple and Southern Water Tribe. The villagers had been happy enough to take his gold back then. But after the manor went up, they grumbled that it was an eyesore, an alien creature that had sprouted overnight from the native soil. To Kyoshi, it was the most beautiful sight she could ever imagine. It was a home. Behind her, Suzu sniffed in disdain. I don't know what our parents were thinking selling these fields to a Ganjanese. Kyoshi's lips went tight. Master Jiangsu was indeed from the Ganjin tribe up in the north, but it was the way Suzu had said it. Maybe they knew the land was as worthless and unproductive as their children, Kyoshi muttered under her breath. The others stopped walking and stared at her. Whoops, she said that a bit too loud, hadn't she? Jay and Suzu balled their fists. It dawned on them what they could do while Ioma and Kyoshi helpless. It had been years since any of the village kids could get within arm's reach of her, but today was a special occasion, wasn't it? Maybe a few bruises in remembrance of old times. Kyoshi steeled herself for the first blow, rising on her toes in the hope that she could at least keep her face out of the fray, so Auntie Mew wouldn't notice. A few punches and kicks and they'd leave her in peace. Really, it was her own fault for letting her mask slip. What do you think you're doing? Familiar voice snarled. Kyoshi grimaced and opened her eyes. Peace was no longer an option, because now Rangi was here. Rangi must have seen them from afar and stalked across the entire great lawn unnoticed, or lain in ambush for them all night, or dropped out of a tree like a webbed leopard. Kyoshi wouldn't have put any of those feats past the military-trained Airbender. Jay and Suzu backed away, trying to swallow their hostile intent like children stuffing stolen candy into their mouths. It occurred to Kyoshi that this might have been the first time they'd ever seen a member of the Fire Nation up close, let alone one as intimidating as Rangi. In her form-fitting armor, the color of onyx and dried blood, she could have been a vengeful spirit come to cleanse a battlefield of the living. Ioma rather impressively held her ground. The Avatar's bodyguard, she said with a faint smile. Thought you weren't supposed to leave his side. Aren't you slacking off? She glanced to the left and right. Or is he here somewhere? Rangi looked at Ioma like she was a wad of foulness the Firebender had stepped in during the walk over. You're not authorized to be on these grounds, she said in her charred grasp. She pointed upward at the jar of kelp. Nor to lay your hands on the Avatar's property. or accost his household staff for that matter. Kyoshi noticed she personally landed a distinct third in that list of considerations. Ioma tried to play it cool. "This container is enormous," she said, shrugging the emphasis her still ongoing feat of elemental control. "It would take 2 grown men to lift it without earthbending. Kyoshi asked us to help her bring it inside the house. Right?" She gave Kyoshi a radiant smile. One that said, "Tell on me and I'll kill you." Kyoshi had seen that expression before countless times when they were younger, whenever hapless adults blundered into the two of them, playing around town. Kyoshi belly scraped up and Ioma with a rock in her hand. But today, she was off her game. Her normally flawless acting had a plaintive, genuine tone to it. Kyoshi suddenly understood what was going on. Ioma really did want to help her with the delivery. She wanted to be invited inside the mansion and to see the avatar up close, like Kyoshi got to every day. She was jealous. A feeling akin to pity settled in Kyoshi's throat. It wasn't strong enough to hold Rangi back from doing her thing, though. The firebender stepped forward. Her fine jawline hardened, and her dark bronze eyes danced with aggression. The air around her body rippled like a living mirage, making the strands of jet black hair that escaped her top knot float upward in the heat. "Put the jar down, walk away, and don't come back," she said. "Unless you want to know what the ashes of your eyebrows smell like." Ioma's expression crumbled. She'd blundered into a predator with much larger fangs, and unlike the adults of the village, no amount of charm or misdirection would work on Rangi. But that didn't mean a parting shot was out of the question. "Sure," she said. "Thought you'd never ask." With a fling of her hands, the jar rocketed straight up into the air past the treetops. "You better find someone who's authorized to catch that." She bolted down the path with Suzu and Jay close behind. "You little..." Rangi made an attempt to go after them. Fist reflexively crooked to serve a helping of flaming pain, but she checked herself. Fiery vengeance would have to wait. She shook her hand out and peered up at the rapidly shrinking jar. Ioma had thrown it really, really hard. No one could claim the girl wasn't talented. Rangi elbowed Kyoshi sharply in the side. "Catch it," she said. "Use earthbending and catch it." I can't," Kyoshi said, quavering with dismay. Her poor, doomed charge reached the apex of its flight. Auntie Mew was going to be furious. A disaster of this magnitude might get back to Master Jiangsu. Her pay would get cut. Or she'd be fired outright. Rangi hadn't given up on her. "What do you mean you can't? Staff ledgers have you listed as an earthbender. Catch it!" "It's not that simple." Yes, Kyoshi was technically a bender, but Rangi didn't know about her little problem. "Do the thing with your hands like she did." Rangi formed the dual claws of crowding bridge, as if the only missing component were a crude visual reminder by a bender who wielded a different element entirely. "Look out!" Kyoshi screamed. She threw herself over Rangi, shielding the smaller girl with her body from the plummeting missile. It fell to the ground entwined. No impact came. No deadly shards of ceramic, or explosion of pickling liquid. "Get off of me, you oaf!" Rangi muttered. She hammered her fist against Kyoshi's protective embrace, a bird beating its wings against a cage. Kyoshi got to her knees and saw that her face and ears were nearly as red as her armor. She helped Rangi to her feet. The jar floated next to them, waist high above the ground. Under Ioma's control, it had wavered and trembled, following her natural patterns of breathing and involuntary motions. But now it was completely still in the air, as if it had been placed on a sturdy iron pedestal. The pebbles in the dusty path trembled. They began to move and bounce in front of Kyoshi's feet, directed by unseen power from below like they'd been scattered across the surface of a beating drum. They marched in seemingly random directions, little drunken soldiers, until they came to rest in a formation that spelled a message. "You're welcome." Kyoshi's head jerked up and she squinted at the distant mansion. There was only one person she knew who could have managed this feat. The pebbles began their dance again, settling into words much faster this time. "This is Yoon, by the way. You know, Avatar Yoon." as if it could have been anyone else. Kyoshi couldn't spot where Yoon was watching them, but she could imagine the playful, teasing smirk on his handsome face as he performed yet another astounding act of bending like it was no big deal, charming the rocks into complete submission. She'd never heard of anyone using Earth to communicate legibly at a distance. Yoon was lucky he wasn't an air nomad, or else the stunt would have gotten him tattooed in celebration for inventing a new technique. What are my 3 favorite ladies doing today? Kyoshi giggled. Okay, not perfectly legible. Sounds like fun, wish I could join you. He knows we can't reply, right? Rangi said. Dumplings, please. Any kind but leek. Enough, Rangi shouted. We're distracting him from his training, and you're late for work. She swept away the pebbles with her foot, less concerned with blazing new trails in the world of earthbending and more with maintaining the daily schedule. Kyoshi plucked the jar off the invisible platform and followed Rangi back to the mansion, stepping slowly through the grass so as not to outpace her. If household duties were all that mattered to the firebender, then that would be the end of it, and nothing more would need to be said. Instead, she could feel Rangi's silence compacting into a denser form inside her slender frame. They were halfway to the gate once it became too much to bear. It's pathetic, Rangi said without turning around. The only way she could manage her disgust with Kyoshi was by not looking at her. The way they step on you. You serve the Avatar. Have some dignity. Kyoshi smiled. I was trying to de-escalate the situation, she murmured. You were going to let them hit you. I saw it. And don't you dare try to claim you were doing the neutral zing or whatever earthbending, Haley. Right on cue, Rangi had transformed from professional guardian of the Avatar, ready to scorch the bones of interlopers without flinching, into the teenage girl no older than the Kyoshi who was easily lost her temper at her friends, and was kind of a raging mother hen to boot. And speaking of your earthbending, you were shown up by a peasant. How have you not mastered the basics by now? I've seen children in Yu Dao bend rocks bigger than that jar. She and Rangi were friends, despite what it looked like. Back when the mansion was under construction, while Kyoshi was learning her duties inside the skeleton of the unfinished house, it had taken her weeks to figure out that the imperious girl who acted like she was still in the junior corps of the fire army only yelled at the people she let inside her shell. Everyone else was scum who didn't warrant the effort. So the most efficient course of action would be to surprise the leader. Ioma, was it? Alone somewhere, and then destroy her so messily that it sends a message to the others not to bother you anymore. Are you listening to me? Kyoshi had missed the greater part of the battle plan. She'd been distracted by the collar of Rangi's armor, which had been mussed in the fall and needed to be straightened so it covered the delicate skin of her nape once more. But her answer was the same regardless. Why resort to violence? She said. She gently nudged the firebender in the small of the back with the jar. I have strong heroes like you to protect me. Rangi made a noise like she wanted to vomit. The boy from Makapu. Yoon couldn't hear what they were saying, but it was possible to read their body language at this distance. Judging from the way she gestured wildly in the air, Rangi was ticked off at Kyoshi. Again. He smiled. The two of them were adorable together. He could have watched them all day, but alas. He rolled over onto his back and slid down the roof of the outer wall, using the edge of the gutter to arrest his fall. He let the impact turn his motion into a vault, front-flipped into the air, and landed on the balls of his feet in the marble courtyard. Eye to eye with Heiran. Shoot. Impressive, the former headmistress of the Royal Fire Academy for Girls said, her arms crossed behind her back. When the spirits ask for a circus clown to intervene on their behalf, I know our time together has paid off. Yoon scrunched his face. His personal firebending tutor had a knack for finding his moments of pride and then crushing them. I finished my hot squat sets early, he said. 500 reps. Perfect form, the whole way. And yet you chose to spend your spare time lounging on the roof instead of moving on to your next exercise or meditating until I returned. No wonder you can't generate flame yet. You can train your body as much as you wish, but your mind remains weak. He noticed Heiran never tore into him like this while her daughter was around. It was as if she didn't want to diminish the Avatar's stature in Rangi's worshipful eyes. His image had to be carefully groomed and maintained, like the miniature trees that dotted the garden. The spirits forbid he appear human for a moment. Yoon dropped into the fire fist stance. He paused for corrections, though it was unnecessary. Not even Heiran could fault his body placement, his spinal posture, his breath control. The only thing missing was the flame. She frowned at him, interpreting his perfection as an act of defiance, but gave him the signal to begin anyway. As he punched at the air, she walked slowly around him in a circle. Fire fist sessions were also opportunities for lectures. What you do when no one is guiding you determines who you are, Heiran said. The motto was probably engraved over a door somewhere in the fire academy. The results of your training are far less important than your attitude toward training. Yoon didn't think she truly believed that, not for a second. She was simply picking on the parts of him she couldn't examine and adjust for immediate improvement. If he couldn't firebend yet under her care, then his flaw resided deeper than in any of her previous students. His punches became crisper, to the point where the sleeves of his cotton training uniform snapped like a whip with each motion. He was a pair of images in a scroll, 2 points in time repeating over and over again. Left fist, right fist. Your situation isn't unique, Heiran went on. History is full of avatars like you who tried to coast on their talents. You're not the only one who wanted to take it easy. Yoon slipped, an event rare enough to notice. His motion took him too far outside his center of gravity, and he stumbled to his knees. Sweat stung his eyes, ran into the corner of his mouth. Take it easy. Take it easy. Was she ignoring the fact that he'd spent sleepless nights poring over scholarly analysis of Yang Chen's political decisions, that he'd exhaustively memorized the names of every Earth Kingdom noble, Fire Nation commander, and Water Tribe chieftain among the living and going back 3 generations among the dead? The forgotten text he'd used to map the ancient sacred sites of the air nomads to such a degree that Kelseg was surprised about a few of them. That's who he was when no one was looking. Someone who dedicated his whole being to his avatarhood. Yoon wanted to make up for the lost time he'd squandered by being discovered so late. He wanted to express gratitude to Jiangsu and the entire world for giving him the greatest gift in existence. Taking it easy was the last thing on his mind. She knows that, he thought. Heiran was purposely goading him by calling him lazy. But an uncontrollable fury rose in his stomach anyway. Yoon's fingers ploughed into the smooth surface of the marble, crushing the stone into his fist as effortlessly as if it were chalk. He would never lash out against the teacher. The only way he could put up resistance against Heiran was to disappoint her, to uphold her accusation that he was a wayward child. His next punch produced a swirling dragon's belch of flame, worthy of the Fire Lord, each spout and flicker rendered lovingly, mockingly in white stone dust. He let it rage and dance like a real fire reacting to the eddies of the breeze, and then let the cloud of particles fall to the ground. To cap it off, make the performance complete, he added the smirk that everyone always said reminded them of Cwtsh. A clown needed his makeup, after all. Heiran stiffened. She looked like she was about to slap him across the face. The blast went nowhere near her, but it didn't exactly fly away from her either. In the old days, masters used to maim their students for insubordination, she said hoarsely. Yoon restrained himself from flinching. What wonderful modern times we live in. A single clap pierced the air. They both looked over to see Jiangsu, watching from the sidelines. Yoon gritted his teeth hard enough to make them squeak. Normally, he could sense his mentor's footfalls through the ground and get his act together. But today was all kinds of off balance. Jiangsu waved Yoon over like he hadn't caught the Avatar and his firebending master at each other's throats. Come, he said to his ward. Let's take a break. The training grounds had alcoves in the walls for stashing weapons, water jars, and hollow discs made of pressed clay powder that would explode harmlessly on impact. Enough supplies to train an army of benders. Jiangsu and Yoon took their tea in the largest of these storage areas, surrounded by straw target practice dummies. The floor was thick with dust. While Yoon poured, Jiangsu plucked a twig that had snagged on a burlap sack and used it as a stylus, drawing a simplified version of a pai shou board on the ground between them. Yoon was confused. The two of them had played the game incessantly while first getting to know each other, but pai shou had been forbidden to him for a long time now. It was a distraction from mastering the elements. Jiangshu contemplated the empty grid, his long face flickering in recollection of past sequences, lines of shining brilliance and outrageous risks unfolding in the tiles. The markers of age radiated outwards from his eyes. The troubles that gave him severe crow's feet and white temples had yet to reach the smooth, flat line of his mouth. "I have some news," he said. "Our emissaries tell us that Tagaka has agreed to sign a new version of her great-grandfather's treaty." Yoon perked up. His master had been trying to pursue a diplomatic solution with the queen of the Seaborn Daofei for years. "What changed, Sifu?" Jiangshu gestured at him. "You. She learned we finally found the Avatar, and that he was one of the strongest benders of this generation. You knew that was true. For Earth, at least. It might have been arrogant of him to think so, but it was hard to argue with the evidence left across the ground. Fifth Nation fleet will cease raiding the coastlines along the Jishan Mountains," Jiangshu said. "They promised not to raise a sail under her colors within the sight of the Eastern Air Temple." "In exchange for what?" "For official access to the timber on Yeso Island, though they've been unofficially logging there for the better part of a decade. The other sages are calling it total diplomatic victory. So much gained for so little." The leaves of Yoon's tea lost their grip on the surface of the liquid. Water was the last element he'd needed to master. He'd always suspected he'd have a better time of it than fire. "Except it's not a victory, is it?" he said, rolling the cup between his fingers. "She's promising to halt her operations in one sector, but a fleet of marauders isn't going to lay down their arms and pick up the plow overnight. They'll cause trouble in the other oceans, maybe go as far north as Chameleon Bay or the Fire Nation home islands. It's just pushing the violence from one corner of the world to the other." "What would you do then?" Jiangshu said. "Reject Tagaka's offer?" Yoon took a turn staring at the blank game board, especially at the sections where players usually lay their boat tiles. He shuddered at the images that came rushing into his head. Contrary to what many of the locals thought, Jiangshu did not keep him locked up in the estate like a moonflower that would wither in too much sunlight. In between training, they regularly took trips around the world with Kelsang on his flying bison, Peng Peng, to meet important people from around the Four Nations. The goal was to make sure Yoon had a cosmopolitan upbringing, since the ideal avatar was also a diplomat, never showing bias to one people or the other. He learned a lot by their side, exploring great cities and talking with their leaders. Sometimes he had fun. The last outing was not one of those times. When Jiangshu told him that they were obliged to survey the extent of the damage inflicted by the largest coordinated pirate raid on the southeast coast of the Earth Kingdom mainlands in over a century, Yoon had steeled himself for blood. Corpses amid smouldering ruins. A scene of total devastation. But as they flew low over the shores on Peng Peng's back, scanning the seaside villages for survivors, he was surprised to see the driftwood houses and straw huts intact, nearly pristine. No sign of the inhabitants anywhere. They had to touch down and investigate a few structures before things fell into place. Inside the homes, they found spears left on racks, tables set with cooked food that hadn't rotted yet, fishing nets in the midst of being repaired. There had been no massacre. By complete surprise, the villagers had been taken, like they were livestock, animals stolen from a herd. Nothing else had been touched by Tagaka's corsairs, except for a common thread of items that Yoon noticed at the last minute. They'd stolen the bells, the drums and the gongs. The watchtowers of any village lucky enough to have one were picked clean. Cast bronze was extremely valuable and nigh irreplaceable in that part of the country, Yoon realized. So were the right quality hides for the drumskins. The pirates had made it so that the village warning systems could be reused when they returned. Nearly 1,000 people were unaccounted for. Conducting a raid on this scale with such precision was not only a crime but a message. Tagaka was more dangerous than her father, her grandfather, and every other crude, bloody-minded pirate that ran the Eastern Sea. Yoon had spent the better part of that night screaming and raging at Jiangshu after his mentor calmly explained that the Earth King was likely not going to do anything to protect his subjects, not ones of so little marginal value, that they were largely on their own to deal with the problem. The emptiness of the pie show board taunted Yoon as loudly as the missing unrung bells. Not if they returned, but when. He put his tea down and leaned back on his hands. We should take her off and pretend we're glad to do it. It's our only chance of rescuing the surviving captives. It'll buy time for the coastal areas to build up defenses, and if Tagaka is bold enough to sail northwest, there's a chance she'll grow overconfident and pick a fight with the Fire Navy. That's an opponent ruthless enough to destroy her completely. His proposal spilled out of his lips naturally, despite the unease it created in his core. The idea of manipulating the nations he was supposed to keep balance over was frightening, solely because of how easy and effective it would be. He waited for a rebuke. Instead, he caught Jiang Shu smiling at him openly, a rare occurrence. See, Jiang Shu said, gesturing at the game board out of habit. This is why you were destined to be a great avatar. You have the insight to think ahead, to see where people are weak and strong. You know which threads of the future to pull. There's not going to be a solution to the Fifth Nation through powerful bending, but there will be a strategy, a line of play that minimizes the suffering they can inflict. And you've spotted it. You're everything Kuruk was not, Jiang Shu continued, and I couldn't be prouder. That was meant to be a genuine compliment. Kuruk had been a genius of the highest caliber when it came to Pai Shou, bending too. But according to Jiang Shu, who'd known him best, the water avatar had been unable to translate his personal talents into effective leadership on the world stage. He'd squandered his time, pursuing pleasures around the Four Nations, and died early. So I guess that means I'll be unhappy and live forever, Yoon thought. Wonderful. He looked across the courtyard where Heiran had taken a post, waiting for them to finish. The woman was a statue. Every piece of grief he got from her was made worse by the fact that she resembled her daughter Rangi so closely, with the same porcelain doll face, pitch-black hair, and eyes tending toward darker bronze than the usual Fire Nation gold. Having a beautiful, adoring bodyguard close to his own age like Rangi was ruined when her spitting image beat the snot out of him on a regular basis. Heiran thinks I'm a little too much like Kuruk, Yoon said. You have to be more understanding with her, Jiang Shu said. She resigned her commission in the the Fire Army to teach Kuruk, and then she left the Royal Academy to teach you. She sacrificed more than any of us for the Avatar. Hearing that he'd ruined two different promising careers for the same woman didn't make him feel any better. That's more reason for her to hate my guts. Jiang Shu got up and motioned for Yoon to do the same. No, her problem is that she loves you, he said. If that's true, then she has a funny way of showing it. Jiang Shu shrugged. Fire Nation mothers. She loves you almost as much as I do. Too much, perhaps. Yoon followed his mentor toward the center of the training floor. The transition from cool shade back to the outdoor heat was a harsh swipe. You must know that you have the love of many people, Jiang Shu said. Kelsan, the visiting sages, nearly everyone who's ever met you. It's my belief that the earth itself loves you. You feel connected to it at all times, like it's speaking to you. Am I right? He was, though Yoon didn't know where he was going with this. Feeling connected to the earth was the first most basic requirement for earthbending. Heiran joined them in the court. On the other hand, firebending is unique among the four bending styles in that it typically does not draw from a mass of elements separate from one's own body, Jiang Shu said. You don't form a bond with the element in your surroundings. Instead, you generate it from within. Am I explaining that correctly, headmistress? Heiran nodded, equally confused as to why they were discussing the obvious. Take off your shoes, Jiang Shu said to Yoon. Huh? Like many earthbenders, Yoon never wore shoes if he could help it. But for firebending training, they'd forced him into a pair of grippy slippers. Dagaka's conditions are that new treaties must be signed on grounds of her choosing, Jiang Shu said. I know I said that diplomacy was more important than bending for this mission, but it would be much more ideal if we had some mastery over fire, in case the pirates need a little show of force. Take off your shoes. The sun beat down on Yoon's head. The buzz of insects grew louder in his ears like an alarm. He'd never disobeyed Jiang Shu before, so he yanked off his slippers, rolled down his socks, and threw them to the side. I don't understand, he said. What's happening here? Jiang Shu surveyed the featureless training floor. Like I said, the earth itself loves you, and you love it. That love, that bond, could be what's holding you back, blocking off the different states of mind necessary to master the different elements. We should try severing that link so that you have nothing to rely on but your inner fire. No outside help. For the first time in his life, Yun saw Heiran hesitate. Jiang Shu, she said. Are you sure that's a good idea? It's an idea, Jiang Shu said. Whether it's good or not depends on the result. An icy knot formed in Yun's stomach as his mind made the connection. You're going to have her bury my feet? Jiang Shu shook his head. Nothing so crude. He put his hand out to the side, palm down, and then drew it upward. Around them, the marble floor sprouted little inch-high pyramids, each ending on a sharp point. The grounds were uniformly blanketed in them from wall to wall. It was as if someone had hammered nails into each space of a pie showboard, and then flipped it over, spikes up. Now, let's see you run through the first sun-gathering form, Jiang Shu said. The garden of caltrops surrounded them in a tight ring. Get out there, right in the middle of it, and show us your stuff. Yun blinked back tears. He looked at Heiran pleadingly. She shook her head and turned away. You can't be serious, he said. Jiang Shu was as calm as a drifting cloud. You may begin when ready, Avatar. Honest work. Stepping through the gate of the mansion was like entering a portal to the spirit world, or so Kyoshi imagined, from hearing Kelsang's stories. It was a complete transition from one set of rules to another. From a dull, mindless place where the only currencies you could spend was sweat and time, sowing your seeds and baiting your hooks in the hope of staving off hunger for another season, to a mystical universe where rituals and negotiations can make you supreme in a single day. The patches were marked by the cool blip of shade underneath the rammed earth wall. Rangi nodded at the two watchmen, grizzled veterans of the Earth Kingdom's army who stiffened their necks and bowed back to her in deference. Lured by better pay into Jiang Shu's service, they'd kept their wide-brimmed helmets, but painted them over with the sage's personal shades of green. Kyoshi always wondered whether that was against the law or not. Inside, the vast garden hummed with conversation. Sages and dignitaries from far-off lands constantly flowed in and out of the estate, and many of them enjoyed conducting their business among the flowers and sweet-smelling fruit trees. An overdressed merchant from Amashu haggled with a Fire Nation procurement officer over cabbage futures, ignoring the cherry blossom petals falling into their tea. Two elegant Northern Water Tribe women, arm in arm, meditatively walked a maze pattern raked into a field of pure white sand. In the corner, a morose young man with carefully disheveled hair bit the end of his brush, struggling with a poem. Any of them could have been, and probably were, benders of the highest order. It always gave Kyoshi a thrill to see so many masters of the elements gathered in one place. When the estate was full of visitors, like today, the air felt alive with power. Sometimes literally so when Kelsang was around and in a playful mood. Auntie Mu, head of the kitchen staff, appeared from one of the side hallways and bounced over to them, looking like a plum rolling down a bumpy hill. She used her momentum to deliver a hard swat to the small of Kyoshi's back. Kyoshi yelped and gripped the jar tighter. Don't carry food around where the guests can see it, Auntie Mu hissed. Use the service entrance. She hustled Kyoshi down the steps of a tunnel, oblivious to the hard bump Kyoshi's forehead took against the top support beam. They shuffled down the corridor that still smelled of sawdust and wet loam through the plaster. It was more obvious down here how new and hastily constructed the complex really was. The roughness of the hallway was another of the many little details that poked holes in the common illusion those under Jiang Shu's roof tried to uphold, from his most exalted guest down to his lowliest employee. The Avatar's presence was an uncomfortably recent blessing. Everyone was going through the motions at an accelerated pace. You were out in the sun too much, weren't you? Auntie Mu said. Your freckles got darker again. Why don't you ever wear that concealer I gave you? It has real crushed nacre in it. Kyoshi's skull throbbed. What, and look like a bloodless ghost? Better than looking like someone sprinkled star poppy seeds over your cheeks. But the only things Kyoshi hated more than gunk on her skin were the warped, infuriating values that older folks like Auntie Mew held around complexion. It was yet another contradiction of the village, that you should make an honest living toiling under the sun, but never in the slightest look like it. In the game of rural Yokoyan beauty standards, Kyoshi had lost that particular round, among others. They climbed another set of stairs, Kyoshi remembering to duck this time, and passed through a hall for drying and spittling the immense amount of firewood needed to fuel the stoves. Auntie Mew at the splitting maul that had been buried in the chopping block by the last person to use it. Instead of being hung up properly on the wall, but she wasn't strong enough to pull it out, and Kyoshi's hands were full. They entered the steamy, cavernous kitchen. The clash of metal pans and roaring flames could have been mistaken for a siege operation. Kyoshi set the pickling jar down on the nearest clear table and took a needed stretch, her arms wobbling with unfamiliar freedom. The jar had been attached to her for so long it felt like saying goodbye to a needy child. Don't forget, you have gift duties tonight. She was startled to hear Rangi's voice. She didn't think the firebender would have followed her this deep into the bowels of the house. Rangi glanced around. Don't waste too much time here. You're not a scullery maid. The nearby kitchen staff, some of whom were scullery maids, looked at them and scowled. Kyoshi winced. The villagers thought she was stuck up for living in the mansion. The other servants thought she was stuck up for her closeness to Yun. And Rangi, with her elite attitude, only made it worse. There was no pleasing anyone, she thought, as Rangi departed for the barracks. Kyoshi spotted an odd figure among the legions of white-clad cooks pounding away at their stations. An airbender, with his orange robes rolled up to his blocky shoulders. His massive paws were covered in flour, and he tucked his forest of beard into his tunic to keep it from shedding. It was like the kitchen had been invaded by a mountain ogre. Kelsing should have been above ground watching the avatar, or at least greeting a visiting sage, not cutting out dumpling wrappers among the cooks. He looked up and grinned when he saw Kyoshi. I've been banished, he said, preempting her question. The Yangshu thinks my presence is causing Yun to prematurely dream about airbending, so we're trying to keep him focused on one element at a time. I needed to feel useful, so here I am. Kyoshi sidled her way over to him through the crowded space and gave the monk a kiss on the cheek. Let me help. She washed her hands in a nearby sink, grabbed a ball of dough to knead, and fell into work beside him. For the past decade, Kelsang had essentially raised her. He'd used what leeway he had with the Southern Air Temple to reside in Yokoya as much as he could, in order to look after Kyoshi. When he had to leave, he foisted her upon different families, begged alms to keep her fed. After Jiangshu brought the avatar to Yokoya for safekeeping, Kelsang twisted his old friend's arm to hire Kyoshi on. He'd done all this, saved the life of a child stranger, for no reason other than she needed someone. In a part of the Earth Kingdom where love was reserved solely for blood relations, the monk from a foreign land was the dearest person in the world to Kyoshi. Which was why she knew his good cheer right now was completely fake. Rumors flew around the house that the once legendary friendship between Avatar Kuruk's companions had deteriorated, especially so between Jiangshu and Kelsang. In the years since Kuruk's death, if the gossip was to be believed, Jiangshu had amassed wealth and influence unbecoming of a sage who was supposed to be dedicated solely to guiding Kuruk's reincarnation. Bending masters came to the house to pay obeisance to him, not the avatar, and decrees that were normally made by the Earth Kings instead bore Jiangshu's seal. Kelsang disapproved of such power-hungry actions and was at risk of being completely shunted to the side. Kyoshi didn't have context around the politics, but she did worry about the growing rift between the two master benders. Couldn't be good for the avatar. Yun adored Kelsang almost as much as she did, but ultimately was loyal to the Earth Sage who'd found him. Distracted by her thoughts, she didn't notice a little puff of flour fly up from the table and hit her in the forehead. White dust clouded her vision. She squinted at Kelsang, who wasn't trying to hide the second shot that spun around above his palm, chambered in a pocket-sized whirlwind he'd summoned. It wasn't me, he said. It was a different airbender. Kyoshi snickered and grabbed the flower bead out of the air. It burst between her fingers. Quit it before Auntie Mew throws us out of here. Then quit looking troubled on my behalf, he said, having read her mind. It's not so bad if I take a break from Avatar business. I'll get to spend more time with you. We should go on vacation, the two of us, perhaps to see the air nomad sacred sites. She would have liked that very much. Chances to share Kelsang's company had gotten rarer as the Avatar and his teachers sank deeper into the mesh of world affairs. But as lowly as her own job was in comparison, she still had the same responsibility to show up every day. I can't, Kyoshi said. I have work. There'd be time enough in the future for travelling with Kelsang. He rolled his eyes. Bah, I've never seen someone so averse to fun since old Abbott. No fruit pies, Dorje. He flicked another blob of flour at her, and she fell to flinch out of the way. I know how to have fun, Kyoshi whispered indignantly as she wiped her nose with the back of her wrist. From the head of the cutting board tables, Auntie Mew gave a tongue-curled whistle, interrupting their debate. Poetry time, she said. Everyone groaned. She was always trying to enforce high culture on her workers, or at least her idea of it. Li, she said, singling out an unfortunate wok handler. You start us off. The poor line cook stumbled as he tried to compose on the spot while keeping count of his syllables. The weather is nice. Sun shining down from the sky. Birds are singing good? Auntie Mew made a face like she'd swigged pure lemon juice. That was awful. Where's your sense of balance, symmetry, contrast? Li threw his hands up in the air. He was paid to fry things, not perform in the upper rings of Ba Sing Se. Can't someone give us a decent verse? Auntie Mew complained. There were no volunteers. I've got cheeks like ripe brown fruit, Kelsang suddenly pitched forth. They shake like boughs in the storm. I blush bright red when I see a bed, and leap at the sound of the horn. The room exploded in laughter. He picked a well-known shanty popular with sailors and field hands, where you improvise raunchy words from the perspective of your object of unrequited affection. It was a game for others to guess who you were singing about, and the simple rhythm made manual labor more pleasant. Brother Kelsang, Auntie Mew said, scandalized. Set an example. He had. The entire staff was already chopping, kneading, and scrubbing to the raucous tune. It was okay to misbehave if a monk did it first. I've got a nose like a dove-tailed deer. I run like a leaf on the wind, Li sang, evidently better at this than haiku. My arms are slight and my waist is tight, and I don't have a sword for my kin. Mirai! A dishwasher yelled out. You got it bad for the greengrocer's daughter. The staff whooped over Li's protest, thinking it a good match. Sometimes it didn't matter to the audience if they guessed right or not. Kyoshi next, someone said. She's never here, so let's make the most of it. Kyoshi was caught off guard. Normally she wasn't inclined in household antics. She caught Kelsang's eyes and saw the challenge twinkling there. Fun, eh? Prove it. Before she could stop herself, the rhythm launched her into a song. I've got two knives that are cast in bronze. They pierce all the way to the soul. They draw you in with the promise of sin, like the moth to the flame and to the coal. The kitchen howled. Auntie Mew clucked in disapproval. Keep going, you naughty girl, Li shouted, glad that the attention was off him. She'd even managed to throw off Kelsang, who looked at her curiously, as if he had a spark of recognition for whom she was describing. Kyoshi knew that wasn't possible when she was simply tossing out the first words that came to her head. She thumped a length of dough onto the table in front of her, creating her own percussion. I've got hair like the starless night. It sticks to my lips when I smile. I'll wind it with yours and we'll drift off course in a ship touching hearts all the while. Somehow the improvisation was easy, though she'd never considered herself a poet, or a bawdy mind for that matter. It was as if another person, someone much more at ease with their own desires, was feeding her the right lines to express herself. And to her surprise, she liked how the inelegant lines made her feel, truthful and silly and raw. For the way I walk is a lantern lit that leads you into the night. I'll hold you close and love you the most until our end is in sight. Here she didn't have time to ponder the darker turn of her verse. A sudden pain shot through her wrist. Kelsang had grabbed her arm and was staring at her, eyes wild and white. His grip squeezed tighter and tighter, crushing her flesh, his nails drawing blood from both her skin and his. "You're hurting me!" she cried out. The room was silent, disbelieving. Kelsang let go, and she caught herself on the edge of the table. A map of purple was stamped on her wrist. "Kyoshi," Kelsang said, his voice constricted and airless. "Kyoshi, where did you learn that song?" Revelations. After Kelsang took her aside into an empty study and spent half an hour tearfully apologizing for hurting her, he told her why he'd lost control. "Oh," Kyoshi said in response to the worst news she'd ever heard in her life. She ran her fingers through her hair and threw her head back. The library where they were hiding was taller than it was long, a mine shaft cramped with scrolls, yanked off the shelves and put back without care. Beams of sunlight revealed how much dust was floating around them. She needed to clean this place up. "You're mistaken," she said to Kelsang. "Yoon is the avatar Jiangshu identified him nearly 2 years ago. Everyone knows this." Kelsang didn't look any happier than she did. "You don't understand. After Kuruk died, the earth and traditions around locating the avatar fell apart. Imagine if the seasons suddenly refused to turn. It was chaos. After so many failures, the sages, earthbenders especially, felt abandoned by the spirits and their ancestors alike." Kyoshi leaned back against the ladder and gripped the rungs tightly. There was talk of Kuruk being the last of the cycle, that the world was destined for an age of strife, to be torn apart by outlaws and warlords, until Jiangshu labeled Yoon as the next avatar. The way it happened had no precedent. Tell me this. With the two of you as close as you are, has Yoon never once told you the details? She shook her head. It was strange now that Kelsang mentioned it. That's because Jiangshu probably forbade him. The full story would cast the shadow of illegitimacy on him. The monk rubbed his eyes. It was abhorrently dusty in here. We were in Makapu, surveying the volcano. We'd honestly given up finding the avatar, like so many others. On the last day of our trip, we noticed a crowd growing in a corner of the town square. They were gathered around a child with a pie show board, Yoon. He was hustling tourists like us, and he made quite a bit of money at it too. To give his opponents confidence, he was running the blind bag gambit. It's when your opponent plays normally, picking their tiles, but you dump yours into a sack and mix them up randomly. Whatever you draw each turn is what you have to play. An insurmountable disadvantage. Kyoshi could see it too easily. Yoon's silver tongue coaxing money out of people's wallets, a stream of banter and flashing smiles. He could probably bankrupt someone and still leave them happy to have met him. What most people don't know, and what Yoon didn't know, was that the blind bag is supposed to be a scam, Kelsang said. You meant to rig the tiles or the bag itself so you have a way to find the exact combinations you need. But Yoon wasn't cheating. He was actually drawing randomly and winning. We might have passed it off as a kid enjoying a string of luck, but Jiangshu noticed he was drawing and playing Kuruk's favorite strategies turn by turn, down to the exact placement of the exact tile. Game after game he was doing this. He displayed tricks and traps that Kuruk explicitly kept secret from anyone but us. Sounds like Kuruk took Pai's show pretty seriously, Kyoshi said. Kelsang snorted and then sneezed, sending a little tornado spiraling towards the skylight. It was one of the few things he did, and he was unequivocally one of the greatest players in history. Depending on what rules you're using, you have as many as 60 tiles. There are over 200 spots on the board where you can put them. To randomly draw and then brilliantly execute a precise line of play that only Kuruk was mad enough to win with in the annals of the game, the odds of it are unfathomable. Kyoshi didn't have a taste for Pai's show, but she knew that masters often talked about playstyles being as individualistic and recognizable as a signature, an identity contained within the board. After what Jiangshu went through with Zhu Ping'an and the Yellownecks, it was as if a mountain range had been lifted off his shoulders, Kelsang said. Any doubts that he might have vanished when he saw Yoon Earthbend. Granted, the kid can only move rocks like no one else. If we identified the avatar solely through a precision-bending contest, he'd be Kuruk's reincarnation hands down. Kyoshi thought back to this morning, and Yoon's incredible manipulation of the earth. In her mind, only the Avatar could have done that. I don't get it, she said. All of this is proof. Yoon is the Avatar. Why would you tell me that I'm... Why would you do that to me? Her anguish was absorbed without an echo by the masses of faded, crumbling paper that surrounded them. Can we get out of here? Kelsung said, his eyes red. They walked in silence down the corridors of the mansion. Kelsang's presence justified taking the shortest route, where the visiting dignitaries might see them. They passed works of calligraphy mounted on the walls that were more precious than bricks of gold. Vases of translucent delicacy held the day's flower cut from the garden. Kyoshi felt like a thief as they passed the casually displayed treasures, no better than an intruder who might slip past the guards and stuff each priceless item into a gunny sack. Even the servants' dormitory, plain and poorly lit, seemed to whisper ingrate at her from its dark corners. Not all of the staff were able to live on site, and she knew that a bed lifted off the floor and a wooden door that was shut tight were better than what many other servants around the Earth Kingdom got. She and Kelsang squeezed inside her room. It was cramped, the two of them being the same height, but as sizable people they had practiced at minimizing themselves. Her quarters were small, but still technically more space than she needed. Besides a few knickknacks from her street life, her only two possessions upon moving into Jiangshu's house were a heavy locked trunk that she'd stowed in the corner, and on top, a leather-bound journal that explained what was in it. Her inheritance from the days before Yokoya. You still have those, Kelsung said. I know how valuable they are to you. I remember tracking you down to the little nest you made around the trunk underneath the blacksmith's house. You hugged the book so tight to your chest and wouldn't let me read it. You look ready to defend it to the death. Her feelings about the items were more complicated than he understood. Kyoshi had never opened the lock, having thrown the key into the ocean one day in a fit of spite, and she'd nearly burned the journal several times over. Down the hall, someone was moving about, making the pine floorboards squeak, so they waited until the footsteps disappeared. Kelsung sat on the bed, bowing the planks in the middle. Kyoshi leaned against the door and braced her feet like an attacking army was trying to beat it down. So you think I'm the Avatar based off a stupid song I made up, she said. Somewhere between the study and her room, she'd found enough backbone to say it out loud. I think you might be the Avatar because you pulled from thin air the exact lines of a poem Kuruk wrote a long time ago, Kelsung said. A poem? A poem wasn't proof. Not like the cold, hard impossibility of what Yoon did. Kelsung could tell she needed a better explanation. What I'm about to tell you, you should keep to yourself, he said. I'm listening. It was about 20 years ago. Kuruk's companions are still very close, but without any real challenges, we drifted toward our separate lives. Jiangshu started working on his family holdings. Heiran started teaching at the Royal Fire Academy and married Rangi's father, Junsik, in the same year. It was the happiest I'd ever seen her. As for me, that was when Abbot Dorje was alive and I was still in his good graces, so I was being groomed to take over the Southern Air Temple. Assigning a pass to the vulnerable benders was a strange mix of satisfying and unnerving voyeuristic. She was spying on things she shouldn't be privy to. What was Kuruk doing? Being Kuruk, traveling the world, breaking hearts and taking names. But one day he showed up on my doorstep out of the blue, trembling like a schoolboy. He wanted me to read over a declaration of eternal love he composed in a poem. Kelsang inhaled sharply through his nose. Kyoshi kept her room dust-free and spotless. This happened 2 months after Heiran's wedding and 3 months before Jiangshu's father got sick, he said. He used a more formal meter than a sailor's ditty, and he didn't sing it, but its contents are exactly what you produced in the spur of the moment. That only weakened the argument. You seem to remember this in overly specific detail, Kyoshi said. The monk furrowed his brow. That's because he was going to give the poem to Heiran. Oh no. She'd heard stories of the water avatar's lack of propriety. That was going several levels too far. What happened next? I meddled, Kelsang said. Kyoshi couldn't tell if he was regretful or proud of his decision. I berated Kuruk for his stupidity and selfishness, for trying to ruin his friend's happy relationship, and made him destroy the confession while I watched. To this day, I don't know if I did the right thing. Heiran always did love Kuruk with some piece of her heart. Maybe everything would have turned out better if they had run off with each other. Kyoshi quickly did the math in her head, and yes, if that had happened, Rangi wouldn't have been born. You did the right thing, she said, with more ferocity than she'd intended to show. I'll never find out. Not long after, Kuruk met Umi. That tragedy unfolded so fast that my memory of it starts to blur. She didn't know who Umi was, and she had no intention of asking. Matters were complicated enough, and Kyoshi was no advanced student of Avatar lore, but she was developing a pretty dim view of the man. I wish I could be more certain, Kelsang said. But if there's anything the last few decades have taught me, it's that life does not work out in certain guaranteed ways. I'm not supposed to talk about this, but Yoon is having problems firebending. I fear Jiangshu is becoming more extreme. He stakes so much on creating his ideal replacement for Kuruk that any time he faces a setback, his response is to dig in and push harder. Kyoshi was more shaken by the revelation that Yoon couldn't firebend than anything else she'd heard so far. The image he projected was of a boy who could do the impossible. Yes, Yoon was her friend, but she still had the same faith in the Avatar as anyone else. Mastering fire should have been easy for someone as clever and talented as he was. Kelsang seemed to pick up on her fear. Kyoshi, Yoon still has the strongest case for being the Avatar. That hasn't changed. He worried the end of his beard. But if the criteria we've lowered ourselves to are improbable things that Kuruk once did, then we have to consider you as well. The monk ruminated for a moment, putting pieces together in his head. To be honest, though, I don't know if I'm entirely upset by this new complication. You have Avatar-worthy merits that you won't acknowledge. Kyoshi scoffed. Such as? He thought it over more before deciding on one. Selfless humility. That's not true. I'm not any more... She caught Kelsang about to laugh at her and scowled. He got up, and her bedboards groaned with relief. I'm sorry, he said. I might have been more able to answer this question years ago, had I the chance to meet your parents like I did with the other village children. More information could have made the difference. Kyoshi scrunched her face and kicked her heel back against the trunk, releasing the sudden burst of anger that ran through her. The wooden side made a drum-like thud. I'm sure they would have loved having a child as valuable as the Avatar, she snapped. A once-in-a-generation prize. Kelsang smiled at her gently. They would have been proud of their daughter no matter what, he said. I know I am. Normally, Kyoshi would have felt comforted by the acknowledgement that she'd become as much of a fixture in Kelsang's life as he had in hers. But if he walked out her door and told Jiangshu what happened, it could tear apart the little corner of the world that the two of them had marked off for themselves. Didn't Kelsang see that? Wasn't he worried? Can we keep this a secret? Kyoshi said. Just for a while, until I can get my bearings. I don't want to be rash. Maybe you'll remember Kuruk's poem differently in the morning. Or Yoon will firebend. Anything. Kelsang didn't answer. He'd been suddenly transfixed by her tiny shelf. It held a gold-dyed tassel, a few beads, a coin she'd pilfered from a shrine donation box and felt too guilty to spend and too afraid to return. The clay turtle she couldn't remember exactly how she'd gotten, other than it was a present from him. He stared at the junk for a long time. Please, Kyoshi said. Kelsang looked back at her and sighed. For a little while, perhaps, he said. But eventually we have to tell Jiangshu and the others. Whatever the truth is, we must find it together. After he left, Kyoshi didn't sit down. She thought best on her feet, motionless. The wooden cell of a room was good enough for that. This was a nightmare. While she wasn't an important political dignitary, she wasn't an idiot either. She knew what kind of bedlam lay behind the precarious balance Jiangshu and Yun had set up, the mountain they'd suspended in the air. From around corners, she'd spied on the bouts of ecstatic sobbing, the sense of utter relief that many of the visiting sages went through when they first laid eyes on Yun. After more than a decade of doubt, he was a solid boy. He was a solid body, a sharp mind, a belatedly fulfilled promise. The inheritor of Blessed Yang Chen's legacy. Avatar Yun was a beacon of light who gave people confidence the world could be saved. Avatar Kyoshi would simply be dirt kicked over the fire. Her eyes landed on the journal lying on the trunk. Her pulse quickened again. Would they have left her behind if they knew there was a chance, no matter how slim, that she held some worth? A knock came from outside. Gifting duty. She'd forgotten. She shoved the entire conversation with Kelsang to the back of her mind as she opened the door. She knew from experience there was no trouble so great that she couldn't pack it away. Kelsang wasn't certain, therefore she didn't need to worry. What she needed to worry about was Rangi having her hide for. "Hey," Yun said. "I was looking for you." Promises. "You know, this is much harder when you're around," Kyoshi said to the Avatar. She and Yun sat on the floor in one of the innumerable receiving rooms. The freestanding screen paintings had been folded up and pushed to the walls, and the potted plants had been set outside to make room for the giant piles of gifts that guests had brought for the Avatar. Yun lay on his back, taking up valuable free space. He lazily waved a custom-forged filigree Jian blade around in the air, stirring an imaginary upside-down pot with it. "I have no idea how to use this," he said. "I hate swords." "A boy who doesn't like swords?" Kyoshi said with a mock gasp. "Put in the armory pile and we'll get Rangi to teach you at some point." There were a lot of guesses around the village about what exactly Kyoshi did in the mansion. Given her orphaned, unwanted status, the farmer's children assumed she handled the dirtiest, most impure jobs, dealing with refuse and carcasses and the like. The truth was somewhat different. What she really did, as her primary role, was pick up after Yun, tidy his messes. The Avatar was such a slob that he needed a full-time servant following in his wake, or else the chaos would overwhelm the entire complex. Soon after taking her on, the senior staff discovered Kyoshi's strong, compulsive need to put things back in their rightful place, minimize clutter, and maintain order. So they put her on Avatar containment duty. This time, the pile they sat hip-deep in was not Yun's fault. Wealthy visitors were constantly showering him with gifts in the hope of currying favor, or simply because they loved him. As big as the house was, there wasn't enough room to give each of them a display place of honor. On a regular basis, Kyoshi had to sort and pack away the heirlooms and antiques and works of art that only seemed to get more lavish and numerous over time. "Oh, look," she said, holding up a lacquered circle set in a crisscross pattern with luminous gems. "Another pie showboard." Yun glanced over. "That one's pretty." "This is, without exaggeration, the 44th board you own now. You're not keeping it." "Ugh, ruthless." She ignored him. He might be the Avatar, but when it came to her officially assigned duties, she reigned above him. And Kyoshi needed this right now. She needed this normalcy to bury what Kelsang had told her. Despite her best efforts, it kept rising from below. The notion that she was betraying Yun and swallowing up what belonged to him. As he lounged on his elbows, Kyoshi noticed Yun wasn't wearing his embroidered indoor slippers. "Those new boots," she said, pointing at his feet. The leather they were crafted from was a beautiful soft grey tone with fur trim like powdery morning snow. "Probably baby turtle seal hide," she thought with revulsion. Yun tensed up. "I found them in a pile earlier." "They don't fit you. Give them over." "I'd rather not." He scooched backward, but was hedged in by more boxes. She curled over to peer at the boots from a closer angle. Did you stuff the extra space with bandages? They're ridiculously too big for you. Take them off." She got to her knees and grabbed his foot with both hands. "Kyoshi, please." She paused and looked up at his face. It was filled with pure dread, and he rarely ever raised his voice at her. It was the second time today a person important to her had acted strangely. She forced herself to acknowledge the two incidents weren't related. So he'd suddenly developed an intense taste for footwear. She'd make note of it. Yoon sat up and put his hands on Kyoshi's shoulders, fixing her with his jade-green eyes. She'd long since become inured to his flirty smiles whenever he wanted to rise out of her. His puppy dog pout when he wanted a favor. But his expression of earnest desire was a weapon he didn't pull out often. The way his troubled thoughts softened the sharp edges of his face was heart-piercing. "Spill it," she said. "What's bothering you?" "I want you to come on a journey with me," he said quietly. "I need you by my side." Kyoshi nearly choked in her surprise. He was offering a taste of the world that only an exalted few got to sample. To be a companion of the Avatar, even for a moment, was an honor beyond reckoning. Flying into the sunset, huddled close to Yoon, the wind in their hair, Bayoma and the other villagers were jealous of her before. They'd go foaming mad with envy now. "What kind of trip is this?" she said, unconsciously lowering herself to his volume. Where is this taking place?" "The Eastern Sea, near the South Pole," he said. "I'm signing a new treaty with Tagaka." Well, so much for fantasy. Kyoshi knocked Yoon's hands off her shoulders and sat back on her knees properly. The motion felt like it helped drain the heat out of her face. "The Fifth Nation," she said. "You're going to sit at the table with the Fifth Nation? And you want me to come with you?" What was she going to do surrounded by a band of bloodthirsty pirates that was bigger than most of the Earth Kingdom's provincial militias? Sweep up their cutlasses? "I know how much you hate outlaws," Yoon said. "I thought you might appreciate seeing a victory over them up close. It's only political, but still." Kyoshi puffed her cheeks in frustration. "Yoon, I am basically your nanny," she said. "You need Rangi for this mission. Better yet, you need the Fire Lord's entire personal legion. Rangi's coming, but I want you as well. You won't be there to fight if things go wrong." He stared at his own feet. "You'll just stand around and watch me as things go right." "For the love of... Why?" "Perspective," he said. "I need your perspective." He pulled out a pie show tile he'd nicked from the set she'd put away and squinted at it like a jeweler in the light. "Is it sad that I want a regular person there?" he said. "Someone who'll be scared and impressed and overwhelmed just like me, and not another professional avatar monitor? That afterward I wanted you to tell me that I'm as good as Yang Chen or Salai, regardless of whether or not that's true?" He laughed bitterly. "I know it sounds stupid, but I think I need the presence of someone who cares about me first and history second. I want you to be proud of me, Yoon, not satisfied with the performance of the Avatar." Kyoshi didn't know what to do. This idea sounded mind-numbingly dangerous. She wasn't equipped to follow the Avatar into politics or battle, not like the great companions of past generations. Her stomach wound into a knot as she thought of the secret between her and Kelsang. They wouldn't get the time they needed to figure that matter out. The world demanded an Avatar or else. "It'll be safer than it sounds," Yoon said. "Oddly enough, Dao Fei gangs hold quite a bit of respect for the Avatar. Either they're superstitious about the Avatar's spiritual powers or intimidated by someone who can drop all four elements on their heads at once." He tried to sound light-hearted, but he looked more and more pained the longer she kept him waiting in silence. Then again, was it so dire of a choice? Zhang Shu would never risk Yuan's life, and she had a hard time believing Yuan would risk hers. Really, the situation wasn't as grand or complicated as she made it out to be. Avatar business and the fate of the Earth Kingdom was for other people in other times. Right now, Kyoshi's friend was depending on her. She'd be there for him. "I'll come," she said. "Someone has to clean up whatever mess you make." Yoon shuddered with relief. He caught her fingers and brought them gently to his cheek, nuzzling into them as if they were ice for a fever. "Thank you," he said. Kyoshi flushed all the way down to her toes. She reminded herself that his casual tendency to be close to her, to share touches, was just part of his personality. She'd caught glimpses and heard stories from the staff that confirmed it. One time he'd kissed the hand of the Princess of Amashu for a second longer than normal and scored an entire new trade agreement as a result. It had taken her a very, very long time after starting at the house to convince herself she was not in love with Yoon. Moments like this threatened to undo all of her hard work. She let herself plunge under the surface and enjoyed being washed over by the simple contact. Yoon reluctantly put her hand down. 3, he said, cocking his ear at the ceramic tile floor with a smile. 2, 1. Rangi slid the door open with a sharp click. Avatar. She bowed deeply and solemnly to Yoon. Then she turned to Kyoshi. You've barely made any progress. Look at all this mess. We were waiting for you, Yoon said. We decided to burn everything. You can start with those hideous silk robes in the corner. As your avatar, I command you to light them up. Right now. Rangi rolled her eyes. Yes, and set the entire mansion on fire. She always tried as hard as she could to remain dignified in front of Yoon, but she cracked on the occasion. And it was usually during the times when the three of them, the youngest people in the complex, were alone together. Exactly, Yoon said cheerily. Burn it all to the ground, reduce it back to nature. We'll achieve pure states of mind. You'd start whining the moment you had to bathe with cold water, Kyoshi said to him. There's a solution for that, Yoon said. Everyone would go to the river, strip down naked, grab the nearest firebender, and... A decorative pillow hit him in the face. Kyoshi's eyes went wide in disbelief. Rangi looked utterly horrified at what she'd done. She'd attacked the Avatar. She stared at her hands like they were covered in blood. A traitor's eternal punishment awaited her in the afterlife. Yoon burst into laughter. Kyoshi followed, his sides shaking until they hurt. Rangi tried not to succumb, clamping her hand over her mouth. But despite her best efforts, little giggles and snorts leaked through her fingers. An older member of the staff walked past, frowning at the trio through the open door, which set them off further. Kyoshi looked at Yoon and Rangi's beautiful, unguarded faces, freed from the weight of their duties, if only for a moment. Her friends. She thought of how unlikely it was that she'd found them. This is what I need to protect. Yoon defended the world, and Rangi defended him, but as far as Kyoshi was concerned, her own sacred ground was marked by the limits where her friends stood. This is what I need to keep safe above all else. The sudden clarity of her realization caused her mirth to evaporate. She retained a rictus grin so the others wouldn't notice her change in mood. Her fist tightened around nothing. And the spirits help anyone who would take this from me.